Good morning, Crossway Church. We're so glad you chose to be here with us this morning. If you would stand as we continue to sing out together. I once was captured by the enemy. He had me thinking I was out of reach. Oh, Jesus, mercy shut his mouth. I once was crippled by the weight of shame, embarrassed, I couldn't even show my face. Oh, Jesus, then I heard you speak. Your love, it comes with no condition. You give us your whole heart. My hope is in the blood of Jesus. I know who I am because of who you are. I hear you calling me beyond my sin. You tell me that grace has taken care of it. Oh, Jesus, you're my victory. Oh, Jesus, you're my victory. See this out, church. Your love, it comes with no condition. You give us your whole heart. My hope is in the blood of Jesus. I know who I am because of who you are. I know who I I serve a king with good intentions. God, you will never turn your back on me. How could a wretch become your treasure? The love of God has changed my destiny. I serve a king with good intentions. God, you will never turn your back on me. How could a wretch become your treasure? The love of God has changed my destiny. Your love, it comes with no conditions. You give us your whole heart. My hope is in the blood of Jesus. I know who I am because of who you are. I know who I am because of who you are. I know who I am. I know who I am. Your love, it comes
the shadow where I hide, the ransom for my life. Oh, is my song. You are good, you're good. Oh, 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 let the King of my heart be the wind inside my sails, the anchor in the waves. Oh, he's my song. Let the King of my heart be the fire inside my veins, the echo of my days. Oh, it is my song. And let the King of my heart be the wind inside my sails, the anchor in the waves. Oh, he is my song. And let the King of my heart be the fire inside my veins, the echo of my days. Oh, it is my song. You are good, you're good. Oh, you are good, you're good. Oh, you are good, you're good. Oh, you are good, you're good.
You're never gonna let me down.
I'm confident.
You're never gonna let me down. You're never gonna let me down.
I'm confident this morning.
You're never gonna let me down. 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 You're good. You're good. Oh, and you are good. You're good. Oh, you are good. You're good.
Good morning. You can have a seat. Welcome to Crossway. My name is Stacy, and we are so glad that you're here with us, whether you're visiting us here in person or you're joining us online. We are just so grateful that you are here to worship with us and to learn more about Jesus. You know, it seems like this week I've heard all over social media and the news and articles and everything else that this week last year was our last normal week. It was this week last year where we last were able to meet together without 6 feet in between us, without masks covering our faces, or without fear of what might happen with the coronavirus. It's been a really hard year. But with cases on the decline and with vaccinations on the rise, it looks like there might be a new normal coming. And that is very exciting. It's one of the best stories I've heard this week come from this new beginning that we're seeing is that of family members who have been separated for the past year by only seeing each other through glass or through a screen. And they're finally able to see each other again. And it's so beautiful to see them hug each other's necks and hold each other's hands. Well, I want you to know that we as your church family are looking forward to the day that we get to see all of our family face to face again. Maybe one day soon we'll also be able to hug each other's necks and shake each other's hands. We have a celebration as a church family coming up. 3 weeks from now is Easter. It's the time we get to celebrate Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection. And we are hoping that our church family will finally be able to meet together again. We're gonna have Easter outside to make it safer for everybody to come. We're so grateful for our church family that has been safe and able to join us here in person, and we are looking forward to our entire family being together again. So Easter, 3 weeks from today, we're gonna have one service at 10:30, and we do hope that you'll plan to be there, that you'll invite somebody to come, and pray also that we have good weather. It is an outdoor service, but if we don't have good weather, we do have plan B. So no matter what, plan to come and invite somebody to come with you. We have one service at 10:30, and we're gonna have baptisms. We already have 5 lined up. We are so excited about these baptisms. They're probably one of my favorite things that we get to do as a church family. So just before Easter is our Good Friday service, and we do hope that you'll be able to attend the Good Friday service. We are offering 2 of them, one at 6 o'clock and the other at 7:30. So we have a lot of very exciting things coming up, and we are so looking forward to our church family being all together again. Right now, we're going to take our offering, and if you're here in person, you can give by simply raising up your hand, and somebody will come by with a bucket, and you can give in that bucket. If you're here in person or you're joining us online, you can go to crosswaychurch.com and you can give by clicking on the Give tab, or you can text any amount to 84321. Will you please pray with me? God, I thank you for the many blessings that you give us. This has been a hard year, but yet we can see your hand moving in our lives and in our world, in the lives of our family and our friends. And we thank you that you are never a silent God, that you are constantly moving in our lives. And God, I just pray for our church family. We thank you so much for the ones that have been safe and able to gather with us in person. And we pray for the ones that are still behind the screen, God. And I pray that they know how much they are loved and they are cared for and they are dearly missed. God, I pray for this Easter service that we are able to gather together again safely, God, that we're able to bring even more people to come to learn about you and the amazing gift that you have to offer us. And God, I just pray for the giving that we have going on right now, God, that you will use that to just spread your name throughout this city and throughout the world. God, may our hearts currently be ready and open to hear the message that TJ has to bring to us today. Maybe we be willing to listen and then act on the things that you have to teach us. In Jesus' name I pray, amen.
So good to see you. So glad you're able to join us, especially if you're in the room, and also if you're joining us online. I am so glad that you guys are here today. We are in the middle of a sermon series that we are doing through the Old Testament book of Esther. And the part of Esther's story that we're going to take a look at today, I think it sheds some important perspective, or it gives us some important perspective on the moments in our life where it feels like God is absent and it's very difficult to tell what God is up to. You need to know that if you become a Christian or if you are a Christian, there are going to be seasons in your faith. There are going to be seasons in your walk with God where it's going to feel like God is absent. It's going to feel like God isn't there. It's going to be difficult to tell what he's up to. For some of you, it may be a season where you have a promise from God, and it seems like you're waiting, and that promise still hasn't been fulfilled. For others of you, perhaps it'll be a season where you've been praying for clarity and direction about something, and God hasn't given it, and you find yourself wondering what's going on. But all of us will go through seasons in our faith where it feels like God is distant. And the part of Esther's story that we're going to look at today, I think helps us with those moments and those seasons. So let me catch you up on where we are in the story of Esther. When we start reading in Esther chapter 3, we're introduced to a guy named Mordecai. Mordecai is second in command of the Persian Empire. He is a very, very powerful man. Also, in Esther chapter 3, we're told about a guy named Mordecai who is a Jew. And Mordecai refuses to bow down and show honor to Haman. Well, Haman, when he finds out about that, becomes angry. And instead of addressing the situation directly with Mordecai, Haman decides that the appropriate response is to kill off all the Jewish people in the entire Persian Empire. So he goes home and he picks a date on the calendar that's 11 months down the road, and then he sets up a meeting with the king to convince the king to let him kill off all the Jewish people. So he goes and he talks to the king, and he kind of bamboozles the king. He doesn't really tell him what group of people he wants to kill off, and he isn't exactly honest or forthright about everything. And at the very end, he ends up bribing the king, and the king, without any hesitation, without any reservations, gives Haman permission to do what he wants to do. So Haman sends an edict throughout the whole empire, notifying everybody about the date where the genocide of the Jewish people is to take place. When Mordecai finds out about the edict, he becomes distraught. And he reaches out to his cousin, who he raised like he was her father. His cousin is named Esther. Esther, as it turns out, is the queen. And so Mordecai urges Esther, listen, you need to go see the king. You need to plead for your people. Well, for Esther, that is a very risky move because there's a law. And the law states that anybody who approaches the king without being asked or invited, that they'll be put to death unless the king extends the scepter. And Esther is not confident that the king will extend the scepter to her. But in spite of the risk, Esther goes and she approaches the king. When the king sees her, he is glad to see her. He extends the scepter and he basically tells her, listen, what can I do for you? If it's within my ability to do it for you, I'd be more than happy to do it. So Esther responds by saying, well, what I want you to do is I'd like you and Haman to come to a dinner that I've prepared. And that's what I really want. So the king eagerly agrees, and they go to dinner with Esther, and over dinner, the king can tell that there's really something else that's on Esther's mind. And so he asks her again, listen, what is it that you really want? What is it that I can do for you? You know that if I could, and if I'm able, I'll do it for you. So Esther responds, well, listen, what I want you to do is you and Haman to come to dinner again tomorrow, and I promise tomorrow night, or I will tell you what it is that's on my heart, what it is that I want to ask you for. And that's where we pick up the story in Esther chapter 5, verse 9. Verse 9 starts this way. Haman went out that day happy and in high spirits. So Haman leaves the dinner with the king and the queen, and he is absolutely on cloud nine. And the reason why he's so excited, the reason why he's so pumped is because he has just had a personal dinner with the king. When we read through the book of Esther, we read a lot about the king eating and throwing parties and doing this sort of thing. And it's, as you read it, it's easy to come to the conclusion that what the king is doing is what you and I do. Sit down with people across the table and are directly interacting with them. But historians tell us that that's not exactly the way Xerxes would eat with people. What he would do is he would gather the people together and they would eat together in an area. And then most of the time what would happen is Xerxes would eat in a completely different room. A room where oftentimes he could see the people who were eating, but they couldn't see him. Xerxes lived a very secluded lifestyle. And most of the time when he ate only with his guards. On a rare occasion, he would invite his wife to eat with him personally or perhaps some of his sons. So Haman leaves dinner because he is excited. He understands the privilege of what he has just experienced. And what makes him more excited is he knows he's going to get to do the same thing again tomorrow. The story continues, but when he saw Mordecai at the king's gate and observed that he neither rose nor showed fear in his presence, he was filled with rage against Mordecai. So on his way home, Haman passes through the part of the palace where Mordecai works. And as he passes by, Mordecai refuses to even acknowledge his presence. He doesn't even stand up and acknowledge that he's there. What's even worse is that Mordecai denies Haman the one thing that he wants more than anything else: fear. Mordecai refuses to even fear Haman, in spite of the fact that the edict is still there, and in a few months, there's going to be a genocide of the Jewish people, including Mordecai. So Haman's pride is wounded, and he becomes enraged. In the next verse we read, nevertheless, Haman restrained himself and went home. So Haman's pride has been wounded, and because his pride has been wounded, he becomes angry. But it's that same pride that keeps him from acting on his anger. He doesn't want Mordecai to know that Mordecai's getting underneath his skin. And so Haman just pretends like everything's fine, that he's not bothered. He bites his tongue, and he makes his way home. Now, it's at this point in the story where Haman decides to take a play out of Xerxes' playbook. He decides that one of the best ways to deal with this frustration is to gather together a group of people that he can impress upon them how great that he is. So we continue reading, and we read, calling together his friends and Zeresh his wife, Haman boasted to them about his vast wealth and his many sons, which seems like a strange thing to brag about, right? Because generally you don't have control over what gender you have when you have a kid or when you make one. But in the ancient world, the whole world was centered around men and boys. And because of that, in the ancient world, it was considered to be a sign of manliness if you had a son. And of course, the more sons that you had, the more manly you were considered to be. This was such a big deal that every single year, Xerxes would send a special gift to the man in the empire that had the most sons. So when we read about Haman bragging about his many sons, he's bragging about his manliness. That's what he's doing. It continues, and all the ways the king has honored him and how he had elevated him above the other nobles and officials. And that's not all, Haman added. I'm the only person Queen Esther invited to accompany the king to the banquet she gave, and she has invited me along with the king tomorrow. So Haman gathers together his wife and his cronies, and he starts bragging on himself. And he just goes on and on and on. He starts off by talking about his net worth, and I'm sure he takes the opportunity to compare his net worth to some of the other guys that he graduated with in college and in business school. And then he talks about his manliness and all his physical feats of manliness. And then he transitions to talking about his career and how he's accomplished this and he's accomplished that. And he tells story after story after story after story to a group of people who have heard it all before. I mean, I think these people are fairly aware of the accomplishments of Haman. I mean, I'm pretty sure his wife, for instance, is very well aware that they have 12 sons. Not new news. But he just goes on and on and on. And I want you to imagine this moment, because we all know people like this, don't we? We all know people like this who, when their life and everything seems to revolve around them, and every conversation they end in finds a way to be circled back around them. We all know the classic one-upper, don't we? The one where we tell the story and they follow up with a story that they think is better or more impressive. And so Haman starts just talking about himself for just a ridiculous amount of time. And I imagine for the people that are there, there's an internal eye roll or two, like, oh my gosh, I've heard this story so many times. And they don't want to disrespect him because he has the king's seal. He's a very powerful man. But inside they're thinking, how long are we going to be here? So he talks about how great he is, how much he's accomplished, how much he's worth, and all that kind of stuff. And then he comes to this conclusion. But all this gives me no satisfaction as long as I see that Jew Mordecai sitting at the king's gate. So after everything that he's accomplished, after everything he's experienced, after everything he's achieved, he comes to the conclusion that all of it means nothing as long as Mordecai is there and he's alive. Now, imagine if you're one of Mordecai's or one of Haman's sons. Imagine hearing him saying this. Hearing your dad, the guy that you love, the guy that you admire, the guy that you want to be like, the guy that you look up to. Imagine hearing him say that you are virtually worthless to him compared to this issue with Mordecai. I mean, this thing, his perspective, Haman's, is so skewed. Things are way out of balance in his life. Now, at this point in the conversation, Haman's wife, Zeresh, decides to interject because she's heard this before, she's sick of it. And she responds to him, and in essence, what she kind of tells him is, listen, what are you going to do, buddy? What are you going to do about it? Because I'm tired. I'm tired of listening to you whine and moan and complain about Mordecai. Man, it's time to do something. And in case Haman was at a lack of ideas for what to do, she decides to give him an idea. And in the next verse we read, his wife Zeresh and all his friends said to him, have a pole set up reaching to a height of 50 cubits, and ask the king in the morning to have Mordecai impaled on it. Then go with the king to the banquet and enjoy yourself. So Haman, in case you're uncertain about what you could do, let me give you an idea. You could have a pole erected, not just any pole, Haman. Don't do it halfway. Get a pole that's 50 cubits high, which is the equivalent of 75 feet or 7.5 stories, just to give you an idea. The palace itself was only 45 feet high. This would have been the tallest structure in the city. So his wife says, look, erect a pole to impale Mordecai on, but not just any pole. You want a pole that's so big that when people see him there, they know exactly what happens to the person who crosses you, the person who gets on your bad side. Make it so big and so tall that every Jewish person in the region can see it, and they'll be struck with fear, thinking about what's coming for them a couple months down the road. Go convince the king to let you do it. You know he probably will. Get that thing done, and then just go enjoy your dinner tomorrow night. So Haman thinks about it, and we read, this suggestion delighted Haman, and he had the pole set up. He said, man, that's a great idea. I think I'm going to do that. So he calls the contractor. He's like, look, I need you to come over like immediately. And the contractor comes over and he sits down with him and he tells him what he wants to do and how they want to do it. And they talk about what it's going to cost and all this sort of stuff. And Haman gives him that initial upfront payment and says, look, it has to be done tonight. So that night, I imagine that Haman went to sleep to the bump and the thump and the pounding of nails as they erected the pole to impale Mordecai on. When we get to chapter 6, the scene shifts from Haman's house to the palace. And in chapter 6, verse 1, we read, "That night the king could not sleep." That night, the night that the pole was being erected to kill Mordecai on, that night of all nights, the king couldn't sleep. Perhaps he couldn't sleep because there was a matter of the state that he was trying to figure out and he just didn't have a good solution. Or perhaps he couldn't sleep because he was worrying about finances. Or perhaps he couldn't sleep because he ate too much at the dinner with the queen and he was just uncomfortable. Or perhaps it was Esther's mysterious question that was keeping him awake. We don't really know what kept the king awake. But what we do know is that of all nights, the king is awake. Now, what are the chances of that happening? If you're the king, you have all kinds of options at your disposal at this point. There are so many different things the king could choose to do. He could choose to say, well, I'm awake, so I might as well get up and go to work and get some stuff done. He could choose to say, well, I'm awake, so, maybe I'll find something fun to do, and maybe I'll get the guys to come in and we can play some card games or something. Or if you're the king, you could decide, man, I really need to sleep because tomorrow's a big day, I got a lot going on. And there are a number of things the king could have done to try to go to sleep. He could have had them draw him a nice warm bath with essential oils, the ones that are supposed to make you sleepy and all that, the nighttime ones. Or he could call somebody in to play some soft, soothing music, or he could get somebody to come in and give him a massage and rub his back and scratch his back until he fell asleep. There are so many options the king could have chosen. But of all of the options available to him, here's what he does. So he ordered the book of the Chronicles, the record of his reign, to be brought in and read to him. His decision, the thing he decides to do, of all the options, is he turns to his guy and he says, look, those books that record that what's happened and the decisions we made and the things that people did during my reign, you go grab one of those books and read it to me. Now, these books are not exciting books. They're kind of a lot like spreadsheets. You just have names, dates, places, outcomes. Historians who've read these books attest to how boring they are. It would be a lot like you and I bringing out a phone book and just going, I'm going to read this bad boy, just for kicks and giggles. Or for maybe kind of like maybe us sitting down with income tax law and going, oh yeah, that's a page turner, So they bring it in. Now what are the chances of him choosing that of all the options on this night? So I imagine he has the guy who has the most monotone voice ever come in and start reading the most boring book ever. And we don't know how long he read. Maybe this guy read for 5 minutes, maybe he read for half hour, maybe he read for an hour, or possibly all the way through the night. But eventually, at some point as he is reading, here's what he ends up reading. It was found recorded there that Mordecai had exposed Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's officers who guarded the doorway, who had conspired to assassinate King Xerxes. So of all the things that they end up reading about in those books, that night they end up reading about an incident that happened 5 years earlier where Mordecai revealed a plot to assassinate the king, and it just happens to be something that Mordecai did that he was never rewarded for. Now, what are the chances that that's what they would end up reading on that night? So the king is listening to this whole thing, and he responds. He says, look, what honor and recognition has Mordecai received for this? He turns to the guy reading it, and he says, look, stop for a second. Hold on, time out. I know you read beyond it. And listen, I didn't hear you read about what I did for him. I didn't hear about any sort of reward that Mordecai received for what he had done. Maybe you read past it and I wasn't paying attention, or maybe you just skipped over it entirely because maybe you thought I wouldn't be interested, or maybe it was just whoever wrote it down, it was difficult to read and you couldn't read their handwriting. But listen, what did I do for him? And the guy responds, he says, look, nothing. Nothing has been done for him. Now, if you're Mordecai, if you're Xerxes, this is a huge problem. This is a huge problem. Persian kings were notorious for rewarding generously people who were loyal to them. For the king, this was a matter of personal safety. If you didn't generously reward the people who protected you and were loyal to you, who was going to do it next time? And so this is a situation. It's a situation that the king decides, man, I have got to resolve this ASAP. In fact, clear my calendar for tomorrow. Nothing is going to happen until this gets addressed. So the king jumps out of bed and he has a mission. And here's what we read. The king said, who is in the court? Now, if you read through the book of Esther, you start to notice that the king seems to really not have the capacity to make a decision on his own. Every time the king makes a decision, literally almost every time in the book of Esther, you read about how he has to consult somebody or find somebody to tell him what he should do. So the king decides, man, I've got to do something about this. I've got to find somebody. Now, while all this is going on, here's what we read. Now, Haman has just entered the outer court of the palace to speak to the king about impaling Mordecai on the pole that he had set up for him. So while the king is listening to the chronicles and trying to figure out how this happened and why this happened and what he's going to do and who can help him, Haman gets up early. He is excited, man. He is super juiced about the situation, and he gets up, and there's a bounce in his step, and that coffee tastes extra great that morning, like it was just the nectar of the gods, and he showers, he's singing in the shower, and there's a pep in his step as he's walking to the palace. He doesn't want anybody to get in line in front of him. He wants to be the first in line. And as he walks to the palace, I'm thinking he looks over at the gallows, at the pole, and he thinks to himself, oh man, today is going to be a great day. He makes his way to the palace. And then we read, his attendants, talking about the kings, answered and said, well, Haman is out there standing in the court. So the king says, bring him in. Now again, let me stop here and say, what are the chances that when the king starts looking for someone to help him reward Mordecai, that Haman is the guy that he finds? You starting to see how these coincidences are stacking up? So Haman, he walks into where the king is, and I'm sure he walks in proud as a peacock. I mean, he is stoked. He gets there where he's standing in front of the king, and then we read, when Haman entered, the king asked him, what should be done for the man the king delights to honor? So as soon as Haman gets in the room, the king is so focused and so just like blinders on when it comes to this issue. Like all he can think about it is that. So he doesn't even stop to ask the obvious question. Haman, what are you doing here? Like you're never here. You never get to the office this early, man. What is it that you want? I know you want something. Like he doesn't even ask that. He just gets right to the thing. Look, what should be done for the man the king delights to honor? And what's interesting to me about the question is he doesn't even name the guy that he intends to honor. Now, what are the chances that the king will word the question that way? So Haman is hearing the question, and we read, now Haman thought to himself, who is there that the king would rather honor than me? He hears the question, And in his pride, he goes, he's talking about me. I'm the guy. And it's easy at this point to kind of judge Haman and think, what a jerk. Like, you are so self-involved. But it's a reasonable assumption for Haman. When you look at the meteoric rise of his career, you can't help but miss that he's kind of Xerxes' golden boy. I mean, and then he carries around the king's signet, and he has the authority of the king. So for Haman, this is a reasonable assumption to make. He thinks, in his head, the king is talking about me. He wants to reward me. He wants to honor me. But he knows that if he uses my name and he tells me that it's me, that I'll probably try to be humble and probably won't really ask for what I really want. So he's leaving my name out of it. So Haman responds, and here's what he says. He says, "For the man the king delights to honor." And I picture Haman saying this almost like he's having to really think about it, like, for the man the king delights to honor. And he pauses right there to give the impression that he has to think about it. But Haman doesn't really have to think about this. He's given a lot of thought to what he really, really wants. He has daydreamed about this. He has had dreams about this. He has fantasized about this. Haman knows exactly what he really wants. But he's got to pretend like he's just trying to figure it out. So for the man the king delights to honor. And then he goes on and says, "Have them bring a royal robe the king has worn, and a horse the king has ridden, one with a royal crest placed on its head. And then let the robe and the horse be entrusted to one of the king's most noble princes. Let them robe the man the king delights to honor, and lead him on the horse through the city streets, proclaiming before him, 'This is what is done for the man the king delights to honor.'" So he tells the king, "Hey, listen, I think what you should do is take one of your royal robes, and I think you should put it on that guy." And everybody would have known this was the king's robe because the king had different robes than everybody else. It was actually considered to be a status symbol or a sign of favor to have and or wear one of the king's robes. And so Haman says, "Look, put that on the guy, and then put him on a royal horse, one that you've ridden," which again would have been a sign of favor and a status symbol. And then what you should do, I think, is you should find one of the most important people in the whole kingdom and have that guy walk the other guy throughout the whole city, everywhere, every intersection, every street, every alley, any place that there are people. And you should have him cry out at the top of his lungs, "This is what's done for the man the king delights to honor." And I'm sure when Haman finished saying all of this, in his head, he thought, "This is going to be great." So the king responds, "Go at once." Holy smokes, Haman, that is incredible. I love that plan. That is so stinking imaginative. I never would have come up with anything like that. That's great. Let's do it. Go at once. Get the robe and the horse and do just as you have suggested for Mordecai the Jew, who sits at the king's gate. Do not neglect anything you have recommended. And again, I'm sure that Haman's like, "Wait, hold on, time out, hold on. Let's pump the brakes a little bit. What just happened? Did you just say, Mordecai, that I'm supposed to do this for Mordecai?" Mordecai, This isn't what he imagined. This is not his dream. It's more like his nightmare. And I want you to picture what it might be like to be him. Imagine that you're standing in front of somebody who has the power to give you the thing that you want more than anything else. The thing that you've been dreaming about, the thing you've been fantasizing about. Maybe for some of you, it's the thing you've been working your tail to the bone, working yourself to the bone to try to get in life. Imagine describing that to somebody who, in excruciating detail, who has the power to give it to you. And not only do they not give it to you, they give it to the person that you hate the most in this world, and then they tell you that you have to guide that person through that experience. I mean, this is brutal for Haman. So Haman got the robe and the horse. He robed Mordecai and led him on horseback through the city streets, proclaiming before him, "This is what is done for the man the king delights to honor." And I'm guessing this whole thing was super awkward and uncomfortable, both for Mordecai and for Haman. Mordecai's sitting at the office doing his thing, average day, just trying to get his work done. Haman walks toward him. Mordecai starts to get a little concerned because he's not sure and he knows, and there's this weird look on Haman's face that he can't quite discern. And they get closer, and next thing you know, Haman's pulling out a robe, and you're starting to wonder, man, what is going on? But eventually he robes him, he puts him on the horse, takes him through the streets, and Haman starts crying out, "This is what's done for the man the king delights to honor." And I'm sure that these words tasted like dirt in his mouth. So, afterward, Mordecai returned to the king's gate. He takes him from street to street, intersection to intersection. And how does Mordecai respond to all of this? He doesn't use it as an opportunity to take jabs at Haman. He doesn't tell Haman, "Hey man, you might want to raise your voice. You need to say it a little bit louder. I noticed we've been doing this for a while and your voice is a little raspy. There's some people who can't quite hear you. You need to speak up a little bit." He doesn't take the opportunity to look at Haman and go, "Hey man, how about those turn of events? Baby, how about your boy?" He doesn't do any of that. He doesn't, after this is all done, he doesn't go home and kick his feet up and go, "Man, I've arrived." He doesn't use the opportunity for self-promotion or anything like that. When it's all said and done, they turn to Mordecai and they're like, "Hey man, where do you want us to drop you off?" And Mordecai's like, "Drop me off at the office. I got some work to do." I mean, you gotta love Mordecai. What an incredible man. And it's right here that I think that Mordecai teaches us an important lesson about what it looks like to trust God. In those moments when we can't see God, in those moments when it seems like God is distant, in the moments when it seems like we can't tell what God is doing. He teaches us an important lesson about what to do in those moments when we have a promise from God, but we haven't quite seen God fulfill that promise yet. He teaches us what to do in those moments when we're praying and we're begging and we're asking God for clarity and for direction, and we still haven't gotten that clarity or direction. In this moment, here's what Mordecai teaches us to do. He teaches us to faithfully handle the responsibilities that God has already given us. I mean, think about this day from Mordecai's perspective. Like, none of this makes sense. None of this makes sense. He gets up that morning, and I'm sure it was like just about every other morning. He did average, ordinary things. He got up, he got his shower, he brushed his teeth, he combed his hair, he had a good cup of coffee because he's a real Christian and Christians drink coffee. And he did all kinds of, just normal things. Got in the chariot, rode to work, probably parked in the same spot, probably walked into the building the same way. And then this whole thing with Haman goes down. And none of it makes sense. And maybe he has this sense that God's up to something, that God's doing something, but he can't tell what's happening at all. And I'm sure that as they're taking him through the city on this tour, he looks up and he can't miss the 75-foot pole that's there. And of course, the rumor mill worked just as good back then as it works now. And I'm guessing that somewhere along the line, he asked, "What is up with the pole?" And somebody went, "Oh yeah, heard that's for you." So Mordecai goes back to work. He doesn't understand anything that's happened to him. And he's probably still thinking, I'm going to end up on that thing. And what does Mordecai decide to do? He decides to faithfully handle the responsibilities. In the middle of the uncertainty, he just handles the responsibilities that God has already given him. And I think that's what we need to do too. Now, later on, the Apostle Paul would say it this way. He would say, "So whether you eat or drink or whatever you do, do it all for the glory of God." If you want to know what it looks like to trust God in the middle of the uncertainty, in the middle of the hazy, in the middle of the foggy moments where you're not sure which way to go or what to do or where God is in the middle of it, if you're not sure what to do, just whatever your hand finds to do, whether you're eating or drinking or whatever you do, just do it all for the glory of God. God has already given you responsibilities. Handle them well. If you're a husband, be the best husband that you can be. If you're a wife, be the best wife that you can be. If you're a dad, be the best dad that you can be. If you're a mom, be the best mom that you can be. If you have a job, go there, be the best boss, be the best employee, be the best coworker that you can possibly be. If God has entrusted you with finances, in other words, you have an income, take that, manage it, do the best you can with the responsibilities that God has already given you. That's how we trust God. That's how we trust God in those moments where He's unseen and we're waiting and it's uncertain. And here's the thing, I'm convinced that it's this that got Mordecai from here to the place where one day he's looking back on it and he's looking at all those coincidences that happened on this day and he went, "Oh, none of it was coincidental. All I knew is you'd given me some responsibility." Holy smokes. If you're in the middle of one of those seasons, can I encourage you? Whatever you do, if you're eating or you're drinking or whatever responsibilities God's given you, do it all to the glory of God. That's what it looks like when we trust Him. So that's how Mordecai responds to all of this. Haman, on the other hand, responds very, very differently. So Haman rushed home with his head covered in grief, and he told Zeresh, his wife, and all his friends everything that had happened to him. His advisors and his wife Zeresh said to him, and this is brutal, "Since Mordecai, before whom your downfall has started, is of Jewish origin, you cannot stand against him. You will surely come to ruin." These people that literally less than 24 hours prior were plotting and helping him plan the downfall of Mordecai are now looking at Haman saying, so after the events of the day, we've come to the conclusion that none of this is accidental. None of it's coincidental. There's something else at work, and that something else that's at work, it cannot be stopped. And by the way, that something else that's at work that you cannot stop is connected somehow to the fact that Mordecai is Jewish. We hate to tell you, but you can't do anything about this. The best you can do is choose to cooperate with it. And by the way, Haman, hate to tell you, cooperating with it means you're going to die. So they look at him and say, "Hey, it's checkmate, man. You can't stop it." Now, what I think is truly incredible about this whole thing here is that you have these people who look at the events of that day, events that by most standards were average, ordinary. Maybe most of us would look at them if it were to happen to us and we would think, well, that's just happenstance or that's just coincidence. They look at all these things, and these are people that don't even believe in God. They look at all that and they can't help but see, yeah, that's the hand of God. And it makes me wonder, how quick are we to see God at work in our world, in the ordinary, in the average parts of our day, in the parts that we take for granted? I wonder if it's possible that there are people who don't even believe in God that see it while we miss it. And I think what happens here is that these people unknowingly leave behind another lesson for us about how we navigate those moments when things are uncertain, how we trust God in those moments when things are uncertain. And here's the lesson that I think they leave behind. We need to tune into what God is doing. Specifically, we need to tune in to what God is doing in the average, ordinary, seemingly coincidental, seemingly happenstance moments of our life. Because just like in the story of Esther, just like how God was intentional and God was at work in the small, in the ordinary, in the average, He's at work in the same way in your life and in mine. And we know this is true. We know this is true because if I were a betting man, I would bet that most of us have a story. If we think about it long enough, we have a story where at some point in our past, there was something that didn't seem like it was a big deal at the time. Seemed average, seemed ordinary, maybe even seemed mundane. But it happened, and it literally shifted the whole course of our life. Someone once said this. They said, coincidence is God's way of remaining anonymous. And what all of this means for you and me is that every single day there are things that I'm going to call divine appointments. There are things that God is doing in the average, ordinary parts of our life. And we probably don't even notice it because we're just not paying attention. We're not tuning in. And so I want to encourage you to tune in to what God's doing in the world. Now, the people that I know that do this best, here's what they do. Every day, they spend time reading the Bible, reading God's Word. And they do that because they want God to shape their thoughts. They want God to shape the way they think and the way they feel about the world. They want God to shape their values. They want to see everything from God's perspective. And then the people who do this best, who tune in into what God's doing in the world best, somewhere along the line that day, they pray a prayer that goes something like this, or at least they express a similar thought. They go, God, listen, today, I know that there are things that I'm going to be tempted to see as average, ordinary, and meaningless, but chances are you're doing something in the middle of that. There's a divine appointment that I think that is available for me sometime today. So God, would you help me to see that moment when it happens? Will you help me to see that thing clearly? God, I know that you're at work in my life, in the life of other people. You're doing stuff in the world. So would you help me to see it? And God, if you'll show it to me, if you'll make it clear, I'll cooperate. I'll do whatever it is that you want to do. I'll be a part of what you're doing in the world. Tune in. Here's what normally happens for the people I know that do this, who are really good at tuning in. They end up seeing God at work everywhere. They could tell you story after story after story, almost every single day, about things that they would have thought were just happenstance, but when they start looking for it and they start tuning in, they realize it's not. bumping into an old friend, thinking about someone you haven't seen for a while, a conversation you ended up in that you didn't expect to end up in, being late for something or being early for something, or they just discover there are really no coincidences. That God's at work, and we can be aware of it, and we can participate in it. So tune in. Now, while they're in the middle of telling Haman all of this, in the next verse we read, while they were still talking with him, the king's eunuchs arrived and hurried Haman away to the banquet that Esther had prepared. So, he doesn't even have time to finish the conversation. And I wonder, as they were taking him to the banquet, did he try to process what they were telling him? And as he was processing it, trying to take it all in, I wonder if he looked up at the pole that he had erected for Mordecai. And I wonder if he put two and two together. You will experience moments, seasons, where God feels distant and silent. But I want you to know that you can trust him, even when you can't see him. And if you find yourself in a space like that, can I encourage you to tune in to what God's doing in the world and faithfully handle the responsibilities that God has already given you? Next week, we're going to pick up the story right here, and I promise you, next week, we're going to get Haman hung. It'll happen finally, for those of you who know the rest of the story. But let's pray. Father, thank you for the opportunity that we have to be a part of what you're doing in the world. And God, I know from personal experience, Lord, it's so easy to take for granted the small things, the seemingly insignificant moments, the seemingly average or ordinary, the mundane. But the more I read the story of Esther, the more I'm convinced that those are moments that really matter. Those are the moments where we can see you at work in some of the most powerful ways. So God, I pray that you'd help us to tune in. God, I pray that you'd make us aware of those moments. And God, whatever part you want us to play, whatever role you have for us, God, I pray that you'd help us to cooperate and work with you. And God, the responsibilities you have put in our life, those are not accidents either. Those are the things that you intend for us, you've entrusted to us. God, help us to trust you by handling those faithfully. And God, I pray all these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Will you stand as we sing together? You are making new wine. In the soil I now surrender. You are making new ground. So I yield to you and to your careful hand. When I trust you, I don't need to understand. Make me your vessel. Make me an offering. Make me bring new wine out of me.
Thank you so much for joining us today. There's so much I've loved about the story of Esther, how Esther and Mordecai obeyed in the little things and in huge things that might have even caused death to them, but they obeyed God. And it was amazing to see how God worked, even behind the scenes, like while Mordecai slept and while the king had a restless night, and even those who didn't even believe in God, were all bringing together the message of what God had in store. And then we have God working in these divine appointments, that he still does all of this today. So this week, I really want to encourage you and challenge you to wake up every morning and just say, God, I'm here and I'm willing. Help me to see through your eyes. Help me to look for these divine appointments that you have already established for my life. Help me not to just see them, but to be a part of what you're doing in my life and in the lives of those around me. Church, I hope you have a great week. Join us back here next week. We love you.